of ultra processed foods, or UPFs. Everyone knows that processed foods are part of a healthy diet. Ultra processed foods are different from processed foods because they combine industrial ingredients and additives in ways that make our foods hyper palatable. And as you'll hear from our experts, these industrially engineered foods are not simply delicious, they are literally irresistible because they change the signals that are sent to our brain's reward center, increase the speed with which that reward is delivered, and they interfere with the signals that tell us to stop eating. What makes an ultra processed food different from processed foods? Ultra processed foods are high in fat, sugar, and salt, and they also have additives like colors, flavors, thickeners, gums, and emulsifiers. So these foods are not just high in fat, sugar, and salt, they're also processed and combined with chemicals in ways that make them unlike the foods our parents and grandparents enjoyed. So, to help us better understand the harms caused by UPFs, we're lucky to have some of the leading experts on UPFs with us today. Professor Ashley Gearhart is a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan and one of the world's leading experts on UPFs. And Professor Laura Schmidt is a professor of public health at the Institute for Health Policy Studies at the University of California in San Francisco, and one of the world's experts on the integration of tobacco and food companies. And after we hear from Dr. Gearhart and Dr. Schmidt, we'll hear from Bobby Parrish, who's helping millions of people like me and you make better food choices through his YouTube channel and his products company, Flav City. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gearhart.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I want to speak to you about ultra processed foods, and I want you to take home that many ultra processed foods aren't just unhealthy, they're engineered to be addictive. They hit the brain hard, activating the same reward circuits that drugs like nicotine and alcohol target. This isn't accidental. It's the result of deliberate design choices that change how ultra processed foods interact with the brain. These products intensify the signal sent to our brain's reward center, creating unnaturally strong reinforcement that drives craving and compulsive use. It starts with the ingredients. Ultra processed foods are manufactured to be broken down from real foods into their most potent components, refined carbohydrates and added fats, all while stripping out nutrients like fiber and water. These changes make the product absorb far more rapidly than whole food would, delivering a fast, concentrated hit to the dopamine system. That speed of delivery matters a lot. Just as refining tobacco or injecting a drug increases its addictive potential, ultra processing increases the speed that the brain is impacted by these hyper rewarding food products. The goal is to hit the bliss point, the just right combination of carbs, fat, and salt that makes the brain light up. But it's not just about the dose, it's about how quickly and intensely it hits. Food scientists have learned how to dismantle the natural structure of food, what's called the food matrix, so the product quite literally melts in your mouth. The melt in your mouth effect isn't just pleasant texture, it accelerates reward and amplifies desire. And then there are the additives, flavor enhancers, colorants, and emulsifiers that further amplify the sensory experience and override the body's natural stopping cues. These compounds, along with the hyper rewarding taste profile, interfere with satiety signals, blunting the body's ability to say, I've had enough. This combination, altering reward signaling, rapid delivery, and impaired stop signals, is the formula for making a cigarette, and it's the formula for making an addictive ultra processed food. The effects are profound. In animal studies, rats choose processed sweeteners over cocaine more than 80% of the time, even when they're already showing signs of addiction to cocaine. And when you look at the brain, the craving for a hyper palatable, ultra processed food and the craving for an addictive drug can look virtually identical. The same neural circuits light up, particularly those involving dopamine and the brain's reward pathways, driving an intense motivation to seek out the substance, even in the face of negative consequences. In humans, systematic reviews show that roughly 14% of adults and 12% of children meet the clinical criteria for an addictive disorder in how they consume ultra processed foods. Among individuals with obesity, that number rises to about 1 in 3. These aren't just casual preferences. They're patterns of use marked by intense cravings, loss of control, and continued use despite negative consequences. And the food industry knows it. They use the language of addiction in their own marketing. Crave-worthy, can't stop, snack attack. Internal documents reveal testing protocols designed to maximize reinforcement and drive repeat consumption, especially in children. So when we say ultra processed foods are more like cigarettes than carrots, we mean it literally. They are engineered to target the brain, override the body, and drive repeat use. This isn't about blaming individuals, it's about understanding the system we're up against. These products are powerful because they're built to be. And just like with tobacco, real change will require exposing the mechanisms through science, policy, and public pressure that are being used to manipulate our biology for profit. I'll now hand it over to Dr. Laura Schmidt.
Yeah, so thanks, Ashley. You know, a lot of people don't realize that in the 1980s, right when ultra processed foods were getting scaled up in the US market, many of our largest food companies were actually owned by big tobacco. Kraft, General Foods, Nabisco, Del Monte, all owned by the tobacco giants, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. So by 1989, Philip Morris, which is the maker of Marlboro cigarettes, owned the largest food company in the world, Kraft General Foods. Now, a lot of people ask me why. Why would a tobacco company buy a big food company? And you don't have to go far to find the answer. The CEO of Philip Morris, Jeff Bible, put it right as they were buying Kraft, put it up front. He said to him, food and cigarettes are very similar products. Both are, as he put it to his shareholders, low-priced consumer packaged goods with huge retail markets. So what they realized is you could use the same production, marketing, and distribution networks to sell both tobacco and food. Now, it turns out that the U.S. tobacco industry was in the food business from 1963 to 1989. That is a 4.5 decade long period. And during that time, ultra processed foods became the main thing available for Americans to eat. And at the same time, we also started to experience an obesity problem, as well as eating disorders rising in the population. So my research is looking at the tobacco industry and the role, which I believe is a very important role that it played in developing ultra-processed foods. So I'm going to just give you 3 ways that this happened. First, the tobacco companies shared with the food industry a lot of knowledge about chemical additives. They'd been using them for years. For example, they would put colors into cigars to get people in the mood to smoke. They'd put artificial flavors like menthol in cigarettes to open up the lungs and deliver more nicotine to the bloodstream. The same color and flavor additives that they were using to develop cigarettes got put into ultra-processed foods and became an important part of the food industry's business model. So, in fact, getting a patent on a particular additive is why R.J. Reynolds, the tobacco company, bought Hawaiian Punch back in 1963. And at the time, the guy who ran their chemical division told the CEOs and the C-suite, quote, "Maybe RJR isn't just a tobacco company. Maybe we're also in the flavor business." Now, in addition to these chemical additives, the tobacco companies knew a lot about how to use sugar to get people hooked. They'd been putting added sugar in cigarettes for decades, and they still do, by the way. Why? Because when inhaled, sugar causes that dopamine rush that Dr. Gearhart was just talking about, that reward response in the brain. And so the food engineers at Kraft and Nabisco, while they were owned by the tobacco companies, leveraged that tobacco expertise to combine sugar, fat, and salt and chemical additives in ways that would optimize that brain reward. Now we have actual objective verification that the brands that were developed by the tobacco companies were uniquely designed to trigger reward in the brain. There's a scientist at University of Kansas, Dr. Tara Fazzino, and she got this giant database of the whole US food supply. And she found that the tobacco-owned food brands were more hyperpalatable than the other food brands. They had higher concentrations of sugar, fat, and salt in them, which is what they use to drive that reward drive. Now, final thing that the tobacco companies taught their food subsidiaries was how to attract kids. They knew that the greatest profits come from snagging consumers in childhood. That makes us loyal and makes us nostalgic for their brands for our whole lifetimes. And so tobacco companies had developed some pretty sophisticated psychological marketing techniques to figure out what consumers' unconscious wants and needs are. And they applied that approach to their child-focused brands like Kool-Aid, Oreos, Jell-O, Lunchables, all owned by tobacco companies, developed for decades. So under R.J. Reynolds, that cartoon character you may remember, Joe Camel, he was on the Camel cigarette. That same company developed Punchy, the little Hawaiian native on the Hawaiian punch can, and they figured out a way to get it into a box just the size for a child to be able to carry around. Under Philip Morris, they had a Marlboro cigarette campaign called the Marlboro Country Store. They took that same ad campaign and they applied it to Kool-Aid. They created the Kool-Aid Wild Wacky Warehouse with toy giveaways and Barbies. You may remember that from your own childhood. So stepping back, I think it's important that people are starting to wake up and starting to realize the fact that our food supply is just saturated with products that are designed to grab our attention and get us hooked. To put it, as some people are saying today, put that food noise in our heads. Now, my research suggests that the food industry's business model is precisely to do that, and that they got a lot of help in creating that business model from the tobacco industry. Now, there are a lot of things that we can do using the courts, government, voting with our feet to address these industries that are harming our health, and particularly to protect kids. And that's what we've learned from the tobacco industry. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. Bobby Parrish.
I think Dr. Laura and Dr. Ashley did such a great job painting the picture of how things have been so perverted and how intentional it was. And I have the lens of actually being in the store and having boots on the ground. I'm kind of known as the grocery store guy. I make videos from the grocery store educating people about what the ingredients are in the products they're buying every day and what they're doing to them and their family. So it's really fun to see from soup to nuts how this is done and how the consumer actually grabs this off of the grocery store and ends up being hooked at the end of the day. And it's really interesting too, because there is quite a difference between processed foods and then ultra processed foods that we're talking about today. I think the word processed sometimes gets a bad rap, but even like steamed vegetables in a can or cheese sticks that are sliced and packaged is a packaged food. Well, I think we would all agree that those could be healthy foods, but when you're talking about the ultra processed food, it's when things get incredibly off the rails, and they certainly are designed to hijack your taste buds. They are designed to send a message to your brain to crave more, to make it more irresistible. And like the doctors talked about, they do it in a way that also they stripped all the nutrition out of the food too. So if you know how to look at a macronutritional profile in the back of a package, which unfortunately most people don't, you'll notice that a lot of these foods, they just lack the fiber, the protein, and they're just loaded with the fat and the sugar and the salt. And so those are the ones that make you addicted to them, but they offer no satiety. And that's obviously on purpose. I mean, when you stripped out the fiber, you're not going to satiate your body. You're going to want to come back and get more and more. And that's the pure definition of, profits over people. But once you start to kind of understand what the ingredients are for ultra processed food, you can start to see it pretty quickly. So if you just turn around any food packaging, and you'll see ingredients that you probably don't have in your pantry at home. Like I guarantee if all of us went home and opened up our pantry, we're not going to see high fructose corn syrup. We might have cane sugar, but we're not going to find the addictive version, high fructose corn syrup, which is horrific. We're not going to find monosodium glutamate, also known as MSG, which, increases that crave worthy that Dr. Ashley talked about and just literally makes you addicted to food. We're not going to find artificial colors, artificial flavors. Your cooking oil is most likely not going to be like a cottonseed oil, which, going back to the brilliant people of Big Food and Big Ag, I mean, something like cottonseed oil, that's what the original Crisco was. It was crystallized cottonseed oil, but back then, nobody was using that kind of fats. Well, your grandparents, my grandparents, great-grandparents were using butter, beef tallow, lard, but then somewhere around like the 1920s or 30s, people in Big Ag thought, well, we have all this agricultural byproduct waste of cotton seeds because we are very big producers of cotton. Is there a way we can turn that into a product we can sell, which is not even edible? It's actually a poisonous item that has to be so processed with heat and hexane and chemicals to turn into an oil. And then all of a sudden they started teaching us that butter is bad, cottonseed oil, canola oil is good, and then it just led us down a path. But they know how to do it. I mean, just like Dr. Laura talked about, the tobacco industry just applied their same knowledge to food. So unfortunately, the blueprint is there. And then a lot of times you'll be in the grocery store and you'll see ultra-processed foods, oftentimes on the front of the package, will boast about being fortified or being rich in vitamins. But when you look on the back, what they did is they stripped it first of all their nutrition, right? So ultra-processed foods take away a lot of the fiber, a lot of the vitamins, and then it's so bare and so non-nutritious, they fortify it with synthetic horrible vitamins like, it can be calcium, it can be any kind of over-the-counter vitamin that is in the wheat or the bran naturally, but they're putting it back in because they stripped it all out. And there's so many ways to see common foods that we grab every day that are ultra processed. So I just made a video the other day on my channel about kid snacks. And Dr. Laura was talking about kids, and I've noticed actually that food manufacturers will add more sugar and more processed ingredients to the kids version compared to the adult version to make them more hooked, because then you obviously have a customer for life. And if you're starting them at 6, you have a long lifespan of a customer. But usually kids' fruit snacks. I saw one that said fruit is the first ingredient, and it was, but then it was followed by high fructose corn syrup, artificial colors, artificial flavorings, which is just a total perversion. You'll see things like yogurt, which is supposed to be healthy because yogurt is a fermented product that's gut healthy. But then if you look at basically anyone that has flavor, whether it's vanilla, strawberry, blueberry, they can top out at 11 to 15 grams of added cane sugar for a 5-ounce cup. And that's encroaching on 4 teaspoons of white cane sugar, which is totally insane, in my opinion. And then you start looking at foods like that have the heart healthy stamp. So a lot of cereals will have the American heart healthy stamp. Corn oil, Mazola corn oil will have the heart healthy stamp. And then you start to learn that those are just pay for play stamps. Like they don't mean anything. It's just you bought it, or the companies did their own studies, but you can't tell me that corn oil that's made with GMO corn that's been bleached and processed and oxidized is good for your health, or a cereal with 12 grams of added cane sugar is good for your health. So once you start to kind of like to know what these ingredients mean, I kind of equate it to like being Neo in the Matrix from the movie. Like you can kind of see through the noise, and you can kind of be like, oh, that's probably not the best thing for me.
Yeah.
Can I ask? I love your videos, and they've really helped me when I'm in the market. I'm sure people who are watching this are wondering. So I know I should look at the ingredient line. I should look at the nutrition facts panel. I should watch out for claims like fortified. What are some other ways that I can distinguish between processed foods, which can be part of a healthy diet, and ultra processed foods that are designed to make me overeat, and help us shoppers kind of navigate our way around the center of the store?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people's answer to that will be like, oh, you're supposed to shop the perimeter of the grocery store, not go in the middle. But I don't think that's doable. I mean, no one's going to do that. Everyone's going to, eventually get to the middle aisles. So a basic understanding of that would be if the ingredient list is like the Bible, where it's like so long, that's usually a bad thing. In general, if there's ingredients in there that you can't pronounce or don't know what it is, that's usually a bad thing. And just in general, it should be a short list of things that you can pronounce. It doesn't seem too high in added sugar. I mean, since you asked the question, I developed this app called Bobby Approved, and you can scan any barcode in the grocery store, and if it's bad, it will tell you it's bad, highlight the bad ingredients and tell you why they're bad and give you a better recommendation. But I usually say baby steps, so I say if a product has excessive cane sugar or processed seed oils, put it back. And you probably eliminate 90% of the bad foods right there, and then after that, then you can move on to, okay, did it have a horrible preservative that is not supposed to be in food? Did it have a coloring that shouldn't be in food? I mean, food shouldn't have colors. I mean, if something needs to be more like neon green, you probably shouldn't eat it.
That's a great way to think about it. But I know as someone who's raised a couple of kids, it's really hard to fight the pester power, right, that comes from kids grabbing the shiniest, brightest, luminescent items in the store, the one with the toy surprise. And so what advice do you have for parents who are kind of in the grocery store shopping with their families? How do they navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, maybe leave the kids at home. It's really hard because just like Dr. Ashley and Laura said, they know what they're doing. So you're going into enemy territory.
Absolutely.
All of the kids' stuff is eye level of the kids, so 3-4 feet, and all of them will have worse ingredients than the adult version. So if you pick up an instant oatmeal for kids versus adults, first of all, they have the cartoon, like that Dr. Laura was talking about, so the kid grabs it, and they always have more sugar, always. So, it's a stacked deck. So I always encourage people just to cook with their kids instead and say like, hey, look, what do you want? Let's make it. And then once they start to taste, I've noticed food that's homemade versus the ultra processed, their taste buds start to shift because they think these highly sweet foods are normal. And when I make these videos and I go to like McDonald's, wherever, and I taste the food, it's cloyingly sweet, or it tastes unnatural. And I can taste like the MSG is actually sending a message to my brain like, okay, I understand why people are hooked on this. So if your palate is that all the time, there's going to be a disconnect to when you taste something that's normal.
Right.
So I think it's our job as parents to reverse that, like reverse the curse, and train their palate to be sensitive to real food so that when they do taste Doritos that have MSG and artificial colors and gobs of sodium, they're like, oh my God, this is disgusting.
I want to ask Dr. Ashley Gearhart a little bit more about what's going on in our brains when we're eating these salty foods that are sweet and filled with saturated fats. But I also want to just remind folks, especially the reporters who are watching and have joined us in the virtual studio, that you can submit your questions in the Q&A tab located right next to the live chat. But Dr. Gearhart, help us just what's going on in our brains. How do this combination of cocktails and other nutrients interfere or change the signals that are going on in our brains? And I think most people would be surprised to understand this connection between what's going into our bellies and what's happening in our brains. Help us understand that.
Absolutely. So the reward and motivation systems in our brain were shaped by the fact that humans have mostly not been able to get enough calories. And so you were way more likely to survive if your brain would light up when you had that hit of sugar, that hit of fat that gave you a bunch of calories. If you could remember the colors that told you that a food had a lot of sugar in it, like ripe berries. So the brain is doing what it was designed to do. It's been that the industry's been able to take our hardwired survival instincts and manipulate these products so they hit it so much more intensely than what a real food can do. And I just think there's this thing that always blows my mind, that sugar is so effective at activating those kind of pleasure, bliss, opioid systems in our brain that something like a painkiller would do. That when babies come out of the womb and they need shots or minor surgeries, rather than give the babies opiates, they'll give them sugar because it's so effective at releasing that opiate hit in the brain that it'll dull their pain. And I think one of the things that people don't kind of realize always about addiction is it might start with pleasure. It might start with, oh, that drink was great or that food tasted wonderful. But over time, your dopamine system, which is the craving, motivation, desire system, that's really what starts to go, off a cliff with addiction. So even if you don't like it that much anymore, when you see that cue that tells you, oh, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, or oh, there's the Golden Arches, or that very specific brand of soda, that cue starts to have that rush of dopamine hit in your brain. And then all of a sudden you're preoccupied and you're craving and you can't focus on what you're doing until you go down to the vending machine and get that little fix.
Right.
And so it's part of the reason right now that our new weight loss medications, the GLP-1 agonists, are having these shocking effects at actually reducing people's drive and desire for things like cocaine and alcohol and opiates and cigarettes, because they're all converging on that same reward system and getting it out of whack so people keep consuming more than what's good for them.
And Dr. Schmidt, it's fascinating that the same food scientists and tobacco scientists were sitting side by side for decades and comparing notes. How much did they understand about this neurological phenomenon?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit more about what they knew. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that I know and the research that I do focuses on industry documents. So these are documents that come from inside these companies, and they've been archived at a big library at UCSF. It's an online digital archive called the Industry Documents Library. And a lot of the documents come out of litigation where the attorneys general sued the tobacco companies around the addictive properties of cigarettes and the fact that the companies were lying to people. They knew it was addictive and they continued to claim it wasn't. It turns out that at Kraft in the 90s, so a lot of our work is historical, there was a group of scientists at a lab in Germany that were studying nicotine, and Philip Morris brought them back to the US to help Kraft think about ways to, say, make fat-free. Fat-free is basically taking cellulose, and cellulose is, I think, if you, it's just raw fiber, right? It doesn't taste very good. You got to add a lot of chemicals and engineer it to make it hyper palatable and desirable. And so that was a real problem for the company. And getting some help from the tobacco side made a lot of sense. And this was a really smart marketing strategy because these companies were very, very successful. Philip Morris was the largest consumer packaged goods company in the world when it owned Kraft and was in the food business. It was also in the alcohol business. It was in the sugar sweetened beverage business. It owned 7-Up. So it was this behemoth company that was really a very successful approach for these companies. Bobby, you mentioned when you're in the store, maybe just don't bring your child because it's so challenging. And, it reminds me that these companies compete long and hard. They pay slotting fees to get their product at your child's eye level. And the other thing about that cereal aisle that drives me nuts, a lot of people, they critique public policies to change this, like take all the color additives and crap out of the food and get government to step in. But the reality is, and a lot of people say, well, you're limiting personal choice. You're limiting freedom of choice when you do that. But if you do what you suggested, you turn that package around and you look, there's no choice. It's the same 3 ingredients every time. It's, sugar, fat, and salt. And then after that, it's a bunch of chemical additives. and a different cartoon character.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, you know, we published a paper in the British Medical Journal on child-focused sweetened beverages that were owned by the tobacco industry, and Kool-Aid, Capri Sun, Hawaiian Punch, Tang, all owned by the tobacco industry, cultivated. When Philip Morris owned Kool-Aid, it needed a cartoon character on every single color and flavor. And they did these very intensive market research studies where they would bring kids in and they would study what a very narrow demographic, little white boys, 8 to 10, what do they like? They like the color blue. So let's create a whole Kool-Aid for them. It turns out the cartoon character is an octopus. The name of the brand of the line extension is Bludini. The kid takes the white powder, puts it into the water, it turns blue. Artificial colors at work, you know, but this is like, it's so insidious how deeply they study the kids and try to get inside that child's mind, think about the aspirations of a child, exploit the fact that a child loves playing, magic. I made the white powder go blue, right? And so this is very exploitative of the child. And I think you're absolutely right on target when you say, just don't bring your child into an environment like that. I think that's, you know, why do that?
Yeah, the deck is stacked against you. And, you know, when you said before, Laura, that, you know, you're limiting our options by changing the ingredients. Well, obviously you're not, because the same product made here is made differently in Canada or the UK. It's made without artificial colors. It's made without high fructose corn syrup. So they're already doing it, but they just choose to give us the inferior ingredients.
Well,
yes.
Let me ask you a question, Bobby, about how, you know, it's so confusing for shoppers, right? None of us most of us are not trained experts. We're not nutritionists or registered dietitians. And what are some foods that you might see in the middle of the store that you think are healthy, but are actually UPFs? What are some examples that people should be on the lookout for? So breakfast cereal's perfect example. What are some other things that are you might think are good for you or good for your kids, but are actually ultra processed?
Yeah, protein bars. Yeah, the grocery store has the biggest wall of protein bars. People are obsessed with protein on the go. But if you look at the ingredients, it honestly reads like a candy bar. And you'll see 12 to 16 grams of sugar. You'll see seed oils. You'll see preservatives. You're really not any different than almost getting a Snickers bar. I mean, it's so close to that. And then one that I liken to a lot also is that the wall of cooking oils and fats. I mean, that's the one that affects everyone, because everyone, when they're cooking at home, is using a fat. And most of us probably grew up using like canola oil and stuff like that. I mean, that's the most processed food ever. I mean, there's nothing natural about turning a canola seed into an oil, or a soybean into an oil. Those have been perverted, completely processed, bleached, chemically processed. So just by swapping that with an extra virgin olive oil, an avocado oil, a ghee, a tallow, a virgin coconut oil, you're already doing yourself a world of goodness there.
One of the questions we got in the chat is about policy solutions. So clearly, the first step is to help consumers, and what are the things. But I wanted to turn to what Congress or state legislators or even local governments might do. As you all know, California is trying to, for the first time, define in law what is an ultra processed food, and their law which is not yet passed but is now moving its way through their legislature, would define a UPF as something that's high in saturated fat or added sugars and sodium, and has one of these cosmetic additives, flavors, colors, emulsifiers, thickening agents, gums, and so on. And then it would phase the worst of those UPFs out of California schools. But what are some other ideas? We've learned so much from other categories. What are some other ways that we can help consumers, encourage our friends in industry to reformulate faster? Let's start with you, Dr. Gearhart. What are some ideas that you've thought about?
Yeah, one of the policies that has the most evidence base, worked both in tobacco and with alcohol, is just as a first step, things like warning labels or labels that make it really clear. So many other countries have these big octagon warning labels when these products have these really unhealthy ultra processing ingredients and things in them. And to me, this is really just a common sense step. When I look at many of our grocery stores and we see that the main thing they're selling is ultra processed junk, I mean, they're not even food stores anymore. And because they really are able to, and this is another policy lever, is restrict health claims on certain products that have certain high levels of sugar, fat, salt, or these cosmetic ingredients. Because I'm a parent with young kids, and I'm just seeing the obsession with protein right now is everywhere, even though there's strong experimental evidence that adding protein to ultra processed food with a poor nutrient profile, same sort of addictive excessive intake pattern. It's just health washing. I think of it as the low tar cigarette of the ultra processed food world.
Hmm.
And so I think saying, if your food has this, this ultra processed product has this bad stuff in it, not only do you need a warning label, but you can't say high in vitamin C or high in protein, because we're really muddying the water. That makes it hard for people to, make the best personal choices for their health and their children's health.
Dr. Schmidt, what do you think?
Yeah, another great idea is regulating child-focused target marketing. This is something that food companies learned from the tobacco industry. In the tobacco industry, when they got sued by our attorneys general, they were forced to take Joe Camel down. Kids don't even smoke, but they knew if they could get that cartoon character in the child's head, then that meant that they were hooked for life. They didn't have to compete with the other company for that consumer. They could raise prices and count on that consumer because of that brand loyalty. And so childhood is a very sensitive period. We know that children can recognize a brand logo at the age of 3. And we don't treat our children with the kind of respect that I think we should to get them out of harm's way. Now, all of these companies claim, and they've been claiming for years, they have a special initiative that they claim they don't advertise to children under 12. And I would ask you, if you don't advertise to children under 12, what is the Coca-Cola bear about, right? I mean, they're making us, I mean, it's ridiculous. And we really need to stand up and say, our kids are off limits here and we protect them. Same with school meals. Now school meals, thank goodness for the National School Lunch Program. It provides the healthiest meal for many of our children. 30 million kids around this country rely on that program to eat. Very important. We should make that meal the best meal of the day. And Bobby, when you were talking a little bit about, habituating to salt and sugar, getting those kids into an environment where they're able to eat a healthy meal and learn the deliciousness of fruits and vegetables and cooked well, like you do. I mean, it's just, to my mind, a no-brainer. And then finally, we have hundreds of years of experience regulating tobacco and alcohol. People take this for granted. Every country in the world taxes alcohol and tobacco. They've been doing it for literally 100 years, right? Now, 130 other countries are taxing sugar-sweetened beverages, but we can't do that because there's such a big industry blockade against doing that. And so I think that, we have really, our politics have kind of ground us to a halt when it comes to the very basic things that other countries get to do, warning labels as well. And we should just stand up and say, hey, we want that too.
Bobby, what ideas, policy ideas?
Yeah, I'll circle back to the kids thing. I'm reading the comments there, and someone recommended that if you're going to take your kids to the store, make sure they're not hungry. That's a very good point, actually. And I was half joking about leaving your kids at home, but I think about my daughter. She's been in the kitchen with me since she was 1 year old, and she's been in the grocery store with me as much time just shopping and also making videos with me. So I think in addition to not going there hungry, going there with a purpose. So I do believe that the majority of your calories should come from homemade food, but going there with a purpose that's saying, hey, we are making X today. Here's our list. Let's go around and get this together. So you go there and you're not distracted by everything else. I think that's really important. Then you can come back and you can make that meal together, or at least include them in part of it, so they know that this is what we go to the store for restorative, nutrient-dense food that we can make at home, and that way they're invested in the process. And then as a benefit of that, they know what that tastes like too. So that I remember when the first time ever my daughter had had a Chick-fil-A sandwich. Someone had it at a birthday, and she didn't like it. I was like, yes, thank you, God.
Your palate is well trained.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think one challenge that we have is that most people have no idea that more than half of our calories are now coming from UPFs, and that 2/3 of our kids' calories are now coming from UPFs. And that's, first of all, that's not the way it's always been. I think people don't realize that this is kind of a recent development, that these foods are engineered differently than the foods I ate when I was growing up and my parents fed me. And then I think it's also, unless you're able to travel overseas, you don't realize the US and the UK are really outliers globally. Like, we get so many more of our calories from UPS than other countries in Asia and Latin America and the EU. And so how do we, and I don't have the answer, I'll be honest, but how do we help people understand that our food's changed really dramatically, and it's been engineered in ways that make it unlike the foods we've been eating? How do we help people see that this is a recent phenomenon and not just the way it's always been? That feels like a big challenge, that people are like, well, we've always been eating processed food, but these foods are different, as we've been talking about. They're really designed to be overeaten. Maybe Dr. Gearhart, you want to help us figure that out?
Yeah. I'm optimistic, and I think the reason why is that, with alcohol or with cigarettes, you don't have to go into a bar. You don't have to suck something through a tube to survive. We all have to go and make choices around food. And the level of human suffering is becoming so undeniable in the United States, where we have millions of children who have liver diseases that we used to only see in people who had middle-age alcohol drinking problems. We had to rename things like adult onset diabetes to type 2 diabetes. And so I think as much as we can do these sort of really providing people with the facts and the research about specifically the role of tobacco, and really how these same levers were being pulled in our food supply for profits, it makes you really, in my mind, I see many of those ultra processed foods as much more like a cigarette or an alcoholic beverage than I do a fruit or a vegetable. I think the term food is now a misnomer. We include way too many things in the label of food. These things are barely, is a pot brownie, a pina colada, saying, we'll just start serving that at lunch. We can start to use these common sense understanding of, if it comes from Mother Nature and humans have been eating it healthfully for thousands and thousands of years, versus something that is really has many of these hedonically engineered ingredients and processes in it. I just think of it in a totally different category than I do real food. And the more we talk to people about this, I think people know in their bones that something is wrong, and they need to know what it is so they can move forward, and they need help from the people who are supposed to be here to make it an even playing field and protect public health.
Watching Flav City is a great place to start. I asked that, or I mentioned that, not only because your videos are amazing, but also because so many people are learning about food through YouTube channels in ways that are different than we would have learned about food even 5 or 10 years ago, where it might have been word of mouth or something on a Facebook page, or even before that, mostly from food advertisers, not necessarily from. So how Bobby, help us understand, how do we break through this sort of presumption? And I think, Dr. Gerhardt, you're totally right. Deep down, we all know there's something different about the things we're eating today than what we were eating 20 or 50 years ago, even though they were all processed foods. How do we kind of break through and get people to realize, wow, this isn't really food. It's an edible food-like substance that's been stripped of its nutritional value and then added, sort of reconfigured to be pre-digested and extra delicious. So how do we help people see that?
Yeah, the nice thing about whether it's social media or YouTube or the internet in general is that there's just endless platforms to educate on. So I have two principles with any content I make. It has to be entertaining and it has to educate. So whether you're watching a 20-minute video on my YouTube or a 30-second video, I view those as multiple options to teach someone, because not everyone's going to want to sit down and learn about foods that spike your glucose for 20 minutes, but you might want to see a quick one for 30 seconds about that, which is something I just did, which was really interesting. So there is that air of like people are sniffing that something is not, quite kosher in there. So there is a hunger for that. And so luckily there's probably more knowledge about this out there than ever. And you can see that. And it's interesting too, just speaking of glucose, I just did some experiments where I was wearing a glucose monitor, eating crappy food, so-called healthy food, and then really healthy food. And, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, my body's different than everyone's, but like you talk about what metabolic train wreck certain foods can do. Like it might not make you like visibly obese, but man, it's just spiking your glucose and making you have a roller coaster all day long. And that's just not a way to live healthy.
Can you say more about the bread aisle? It's kind of my personal white whale, because most of us aren't going to bake bread.
Yeah.
We don't eat like other cultures do, where you might buy bread every day.
Yeah.
So if I'm staring at that rack of bread, and what are some tips for consumers who are trying to figure out which ones are the ones that are not UPF or the ones that are better for me? Help us navigate that.
Yeah, it's insane how big the wall of breads is at the grocery store, and it's insane how long they can last without getting mold on there, because that's not natural. But luckily, I've done a lot of videos about that, and I'd say 95% of the breads out there are probably going to fall under the ultra-processed food ingredient list and wouldn't be made with ingredients that we would probably bake bread at home with. So you'll oftentimes see enriched wheat flour, which is the old whole grain that just got stripped down to enriched wheat. But it's tricky, because even breads that say whole wheat will have whole followed by enriched. But if you just buy a bread that only has whole grains in there, nothing enriched, there should not be any type of processed oils in there. So many breads have soybean oil and canola oil. Once again, nobody uses that to make bread at home. Then there's usually a litany of preservatives, emulsifiers, and dough conditioners. And these are just things that will make the bread last longer, but also like make them proof really quick, so they can just bake thousands of loaves at one time. So there's ingredients like datum, or if you see a dough conditioner, if you see gums, emulsifiers, like those shouldn't be in bread. So it should be a relatively small list. A little bit of cane sugar could be okay to help the yeast ferment. I just think of brands that I see at the grocery store. I mean, Ezekiel makes an organic sprouted grain one. Even Aldi has a sprouted grain bread called Knock Your Socks Off. There's a bread brand that uses freshly milled, stone milled wheat flour called One Mighty Mill. So just in general, it'd be like breads that use real whole wheat, minimal ingredients, and if you see any of the traditional signs of ultra-processed food ingredients, it's a no.
And thank you, Melinda, for posting a video from the Real Organic Project, which is a great, trustworthy third-party certification if you're trying to choose foods that have been not only good for you, but also produced in ways that help build soil health and fulfill some of the other values that we all share. We only have a few minutes left, so just parting thoughts about what are the things that consumers should be taking away about UPFs. Bobby, do you want to start us off, and how should we be thinking about this? Tips for the grocery store, but also what should policymakers be thinking about, because this is getting so much more attention than it has before.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it from the grocery store lens, which is something that I do on a daily basis. It's that, the grocery store, once again, was designed to trap you in there, and it's loaded with ingredients that are bad for you and make you addicted to the food, so you come back for more. So I would just start with baby steps. If whatever you're picking up has a processed seed oil, if it has canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil, or it has refined cane sugar above a few grams, just put it back and find a swap.
And Dr. Schmidt?
Yeah, I'm like others. I'm really encouraged. I've been sitting around for decades watching the epidemiological evidence and childhood obesity, diabetes, fatty liver disease just ticking up. It's been like watching a slow motion train wreck. And years ago, I was calling to chronic disease in children the global warming of public health. And now we actually have some action going on. I mean, there are states around the country that are really, serious about getting under the hood of this problem and making change happen. And so I, I would encourage people to just get active. There's a lot of activism going on in this country on all sides around this issue, and now is our moment. And so I think we should all we know what to do. We know how to regulate addictive substances. We've been doing it with alcohol and tobacco forever. So let's just take that arsenal of tools to protect kids and apply it to this.
Great. Dr. Gearhart?
One of the things that I think is so important is we already have the alternative, which is real food. We don't have to create a new painkiller or we've got it. We've got fruits and vegetables and nuts and beans and high quality dairy and high quality unprocessed meats. That's awesome. That nourishes us, and it's not there to hook you and lead you to want more and more and more. And I just want to leave on one last little piece of evidence that's been coming out recently in our lab, which is the link of how important it is to eat real nourishing foods for adults and for children for our mental health. And we're just seeing huge links with things like depression and anxiety and ADHD. And so to really nourish our bodies is going to nourish our minds and our well-being. And it has to be just an absolute no-brainer for our kids right now. So I'm thrilled to speak today and with Bobby and Laura and Scott, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thanks to our experts, you've made our lives easier and our diets better. Really grateful for that. And thanks to all the folks who are watching. If you want more information, you can always go to ewg.org or visit our experts. All have their websites and their apps. So please use the tools that are available, and really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.